Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's so good to have you with us. We're resuming our study on the book of Daniel, and this is for November 26, 2023. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way, but you can listen to it anytime that you wish. And Daniel chapter 11 is a very challenging chapter, and it consists of near and far prophecies that are given to Daniel. And there are over 135 prophecies in this chapter alone. And we're going to be dealing with the near prophecies first. I can't go through entirely through all 135. I'll just hit highlights. And then we'll have the far prophecies that are near the end of the chapter, starting with verse 35. And that'll be a third sermon that has to do with what's going on behind the scenes in the angelic realms, because we have chapter 10 that talks about the Prince of Persia and him, opposing this supernatural being. And then they'll be talking in chapter 12 about Michael the Archangel, and there are things going on behind the scenes. And my friends, I might add, there are still things going on behind the scenes, things that we do not see. And so those are the three sermons that are coming at you. But starting with Daniel chapter 1, the near prophecies, and we see in Daniel chapter 11, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I rose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. So the 3 more kings that arise in Persia, this Darius the Mede is not one of them. It says in Persia, by the way. We're going to be talking about presently Cyrus the Great is reigning, and there'll be 3 more. And they are Cambyses, who came to power in 530 BC, and then there's just one fella, Pseudo-Smyrtus, which was just barely 1 year, and after him is Darius the first of called Darius Histopes, and he is not to be confused with this Darius right here. This is Darius was a common name, so it's not uncommon for there to be like Herod the Great, and then there's 4 other Herods, and you have to figure out which Herod you're talking about. So just because it says Darius, it doesn't necessarily mean some other Darius. You have to distinguish between them. And so Darius Histopes, he reigns from 521 to 486 BC. Now, perhaps they aren't counting this fellow, Pseudo-Smyrtus, who was barely a year in his reign. And maybe they have in mind Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius. I really can't distinguish that. But nevertheless, there comes a 4th. And it says, there will be 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia, then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. Well, that's interesting. So this kind of helps us identify. We can identify who this one is who arouses the whole empire of Greece. And he is very, very wealthy and very, very powerful. And he attacks Greece, and this is known as Xerxes. He also has another name, and what king doesn't? And his name is Ahasuerus. And that's the name that is used in the Bible in the book of Esther. And so we have a lot going on here. So we can go to the book of Esther and pick up a little more information about him. So we're going to come back to the book of Daniel, but we're going to go over to the book of Esther, which is on the other side of Psalms. I'm getting there. And Job. There it is. And the year is approximately 483. 483. Let me double check that. I've got a little map here. Yeah. It's about 483. And it isn't his first year of reign. It starts out here in book 1, chapter 1 of Esther. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. India to Ethiopia. That's an incredible amount. Also includes Turkey, modern-day Turkey. And so he had a great empire, and that was the extent, I believe, the greatest extent of the Medo-Persian Empire, and the one who reigned during that time was Xerxes. And he had 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media. Interesting. Usually it says Medo-Persia, but here Persia and Media. Persia is now ascendant. The nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence, and he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. Well, that's 6 months, friends. And to gather these people to Susa and entertain them and talk to them, kind of have a powwow for 180 days, 6 months. They were planning something. This wasn't get to come and just have a yee-haw good time and encourage the guys. This was some intense planning that they were doing. Now, history has come alongside the Bible. We don't need history, but it's helpful when the history is available. And it says here, Xerxes, being about to take in hand the expedition against Athens, called together an assembly of noblest Persians to learn their opinions and to lay before them his own designs. This was from a fellow called Herodotus. He was a historian who was writing in time right then. He said that Xerxes said, "My intent is to throw a bridge over the Hellespont." That is a gap between Europe and between Asia. And that gap between Europe and Asia, that gap was called the Hellespont. And it was 1 to 4 miles wide. They'd probably choose the shortest route, the 1 mile wide section. And he was going to throw up a pontoon boat of some sort. Thereby I may obtain vengeance from the Athenians for the wrongs committed by them against the Persians and against my father. So Xerxes was planning all this. And that just as a historian who wrote about this, And we have it here in the Bible as well that he was gathering all these princes and governors and army officials. And so there was this great plan to invade Greece. It was no small undertaking. Greece, as you know, was a war machine. They had fought among themselves for years and years. Sparta, they raised their boys ever since they were 6 years old to be uh, Spartan soldiers, and so they were a war machine. Athens, they came into some money. They found silver mines and began to mine them, and with all this money, they voted democratically to, instead of lining their pockets with all this silver, instead they would build ships. And they built triremes. They built 200 triremes. Triremes means three-tiered. And they had three rowing groups inside there, and they would row these massive ships, and these ships would plow into the enemy ships and sink them. Well, anyhow, they had these 200 ships. So they secured themselves navally. They had this massive army. The only problem was they fought among themselves. And so as they fought among themselves, they were at least semi-occupied to world conquering until about the time of Alexander the Great, and he got them all together, and boy did he take on Persia. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. In the meantime, Ahasuerus, also named Xerxes, was planning this great invasion, and he needed ships, he needed a massive army, and so he was planning all this. And one of the things that he was doing was that he was trying to show them that he had the means, he had the glory, he had the majesty, he had the influence, he was fabulously wealthy, and they could pull this off. So that was the purpose. It says here in verse 5 of Esther 1, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. This was a fabulous place, friends. There were hangings of fine white and violet linen held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. I mean, this was quite the show place. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also had a banquet for women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So, this was the 7-day banquet that they were having, and they were really putting on the dog. And it was the finality of this 6-month deliberation. And it was just meant to bowl over everybody and convince them that they could do this thing, and that Xerxes was the man in charge. And it says in verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Sethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the prince, for she was beautiful. But she refused. Talk about putting a pin in somebody's bubble. And the queen refused. I mean, he lost face here. They were wondering, they could have been wondering, and probably were. This king is supposed to be the leader of our armies and the leader of this massive group of people, and he can't even ask his wife to come and she'll do it? Well, if he can't command her, how can he command an army? And so this was a tremendous loss of face to him. And it says, but Queen Vashti refused to come as the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, the situation, what am I going to do? And they said, you need to depose her, and you need to get yourself a new queen. And so, friends, that's what he did. And remember, I'm still preaching on Daniel and the prophecy, but I'm trying to help you understand how this ties in with the book of Esther, and to show you that the Bible is extremely accurate. And then in chapter 2, it says here in verse 15, now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. They already thought she was pretty special if she did something like that. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now, the reason why I read that is because this is the 7th year of his reign, and chapter 1, when he had this banquet and that 180 days of deliberation, it was in his 3rd year of his reign. So what happened in those 4 years? You mean it took 4 years to get this queen ready? No, he was off fighting the Greek war, and he was 1,500 miles away. He was personally present with 1,000 ships and an army of at least 200,000. Some say 1,000,000, but I'd go with the lower number, 200,000. They had put this pontoon boat bridge 1 mile long, floating. It was a double pontoon boat. Evidently, they could take 2 strings of men across, and they marched them all across and got over into Europe that way, you see. And so they were able to get to Greece. And as they were marching there on Greece, there was 300 stubborn Spartans at Thermopylae who withstood this army. They had 10,000 immortals. They were the tip of the spearhead, so to speak. And they all dressed the same. You couldn't recognize their faces or anything. And when they got killed, one would just take his place. There'd always be 10,000 of them. And they marched against them. And of course, these 300 Spartans, there was other support people behind them. And they fought for quite a few days and really put a dent in that army. Meanwhile, here was Xerxes on a ship, and he was on that ship, one of 1,000 ships. But remember, the Athenians had built 200 triremes. They were still outnumbered 5-1. But they lured the ships of the Persians into a narrow strait near the island of Salamis. And so they could only be so wide. They couldn't get around them on the side or anything like this. And matter of fact, the 1,000 ships, they sent 300 of them around the other side of Salamis, so that if they went bad for the Greeks, and they were trying to escape, they could intercept them. And it might as well, because they couldn't get all 1,000 of them at the Greeks at any one time. And so they came to this strait near the island of Salamis. And one mistake was made also, and that was that to try and sneak up on these people, the Greeks, they rowed all night. And by the time they got there to Salamis, their rowers were exhausted. And so they went and crashed against the Greeks, who weren't exhausted. And when it went bad for them, they couldn't even back up, because there was ships and ships and ships and ships behind them in the way. And so the Greeks had their way with them, and they were strong, and they kept beating them and beating them and beating them. It was an incredible naval victory. Meanwhile, after they were able to find a path around Thermopylae and come in from behind them and eliminate this, they marched on to Athens and ransacked the place and burned it down. But that wasn't the end of the Greeks. And the Greeks then fought them at Plataea and beat their army. And so the victory was completely on the side of the Greeks overall, and the army of Xerxes went back to Asia. They took down their pontoon bridge, and they confined themselves to that. That was the beginning of the end of the expansion and the greatness of Persia. From that time on, the Greeks were beginning to pull together, realizing that there were greater powers, greater threats, and if they acted together, they could protect themselves. So, my friends, it ties in, doesn't it? Going back then to Daniel in chapter 11, and it says here, starting with verse 3, let me back up to verse 2, Daniel 11:2. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then the 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. That's Xerxes, Ahasuerus. As soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And that's exactly what happened, you see. And this was said 60 years before it even happened. There are people, they don't want to believe that the Bible could be that accurate. They don't want to believe that there could be such a thing as prophecy. They don't want to believe that there's a God who knows exactly what's going to happen in the future. And so they say that this Daniel was written after the fact, and this was just reporting history. No. It says in verse 3, and a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. Well, my friends, this mighty king that arises is Alexander the Great. But as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, 4 points, divided into 4 pieces by the 4 generals, though not his own descendants. That's exactly what happened to Alexander the Great. Not according to his authority, which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to the others beside them. Okay. Then it starts talking about directional kingdoms. It doesn't name them. It says, then the king of the south will grow strong along with his princes. Now, you have to understand that this is oriented toward Israel. And so south of Israel would be Egypt, and who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be great dominion indeed. After some years, they will form an alliance and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. So the king of the north of Israel, king of the south of Israel, and they are just going back and forth, fighting back and forth. The rulers of Egypt are Greek. The rulers in Syria and the king of the north are Greek. And they have a Greek flavor to them. And yet they fight among themselves again. Hey, we're Greeks. Can't we get along? But no, that's not the case. They're very warlike. They're very got to have the ascendancy and got to have the power. You know, it wasn't just Alexander the Great that had to conquer everything. This was the mindset of the whole country. And so after some years, they form an alliance and they say, hey, why don't I send my daughter up there and you marry her and have children, and then your son will reign over your kingdom and ours. You know, we'll get this thing solved. Her name was Berenice, and Antiochus, I don't know what number he was, like third or fourth or whatever. He married her, divorced his wife. See, they weren't they weren't like the Asian kings where you could have as many wives as you want. They used to try to have one wife at a time and then mistresses. And so they didn't have this fight over who was supposed to be king. Well, when he divorced his wife to marry Berenice and they had a son, she ended up poisoning the divorced wife, poisoned the king, the wife, and the son. And then she took her son and put him in charge. That didn't work out so well. Then there was another woman, if you look at verse 17, and they're going back and forth and describing these battles, back and forth and back and forth. 17, he will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. So now there's this king of the north saying, I'll give you my daughter, and my daughter will marry your son, and as a result, we can get maybe this thing work out that way through that marriage. And her name was Cleopatra. But friends, it wasn't the Cleopatra we know about. There were 7 Cleopatras. And the Cleopatra we know about, the last one, she was the one that had the love affair with Mark Antony and also Julius Caesar, not in that order. And she was born in Alexandria and married her brother. And then he died, and so she married another brother younger than him. And she co-reigned with her brother, and then anyhow something happened to him. And then she had this affair with Julius Caesar, and that's not the woman. This is a different Cleopatra. But here are 135 prophecies if I were to chase them down, and it becomes extremely tedious to preach. Matter of fact, Dr. Whitcomb says as much in his commentary. But if you're interested, and how did I know that there are 135 prophecies? Well, you see this book right here, where it says Daniel on it, right there. Well, that is the book that I was using by Dr. Walvoord. And he used to be the president of Dallas Theological Seminary. And he wrote this book some years ago. I don't know that he's even alive now. But nevertheless, he counted up those prophecies and chased them down, and they were all fulfilled. You know, that's good enough for me. I don't have the time to do that. But just so you know, there are people who do this sort of stuff. And I've just given you enough so that you can know that the Ptolemies, the kings of the north, and the Ptolemies of the south and the Seleucids of the north were going at it for years and years. And then there is a prophecy that kind of goes into this Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus Epiphanes, he is the one who desecrates the temple, trying to get the Jewish people to become Greeks, to not be circumcising, not be offering sacrifices to their God, not observing their Sabbath the way they do, and to worship Him as God. And so he goes in and he desecrates the temple. And we see this in Daniel 31. And this is still future, but it's still the near future. And it's 220 years into the future from when Daniel wrote this. And in Daniel chapter 11, starting with verse 31, we read these words. I'll back up to 30. For ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay, so it is some months that they desecrate the temple, and it's called the abomination of desolation. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes. Recall in Daniel chapter 8, starting with verse 8, it talks about, then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. That's Alexander the Great. But as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of the heavens. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. So it had to be the king of the north. West was in the sea. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth. And it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the west. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. That's Antiochus Epiphanes too. It keeps centering in on this fella. Okay. And so this willful king talks about Antichrist's future is depicted in chapter 9 and verse 26. When it says the 70 weeks of Daniel, it says, then after 62 weeks the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Now, one of the key things there is it will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Antiochus Epiphanes only destroyed the sanctuary, or at least desecrated. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. On the wings of abomination will come the one who makes desolate. So, friends, we're talking about 2 different desecrations of the temple here. There's the one that Antiochus Epiphanes did, which was kind of a forerunner of the Antichrist-like actions that now this Antichrist is actually doing. And Jesus Christ talks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet in Daniel 9 that is yet future. So this abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet that the Lord refers to that is yet future is the one with the Antichrist and not with Antiochus Epiphanes, who just is a prefigurement of it. I know it all gets a little bit confusing, but that is the near prophecies. And then we're going to take a leap into the far prophecies the following week. How do you know that, Pastor? We'll look at verse 36, Daniel 11, and verse 36. Then the king will do as he pleases. Actually, I went verse 35. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time. So there's this leap to the end time. A leap is going to be now into the Roman kingdom, the leg kingdom, the 10-toe kingdom, because it is still to come at the appointed time. And so it starts to talk about this real future thing. Way off, the very end of the statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, and the supernatural stone that will come at the very end and destroy all these in a wishable way. Well, my friends, that is what's going to be up next. Instead of 200 and 300 years in the future, the near future, this is going to be 2, maybe even 3,000 years in the future yet from this time. And so the reason why he tells the near future and then the far future is so that when you see the 100% accuracy of the near future, you know what's going to happen in the far future can be trusted as well. And my friends, as a Bible student and as the one who samples the news today, we see things happening and tumblers falling in place that look like they're going to unlock this thing right before our eyes. And it's very important for you to know what's going on behind the scenes. So you want to listen to the next 2 messages. God's blessing upon you as you focus on our Lord's second coming.